Welcome back. Today we're diving into something pretty radical. It's a new strategic framework called the Nithirote Doctrine, and it really aims to completely overhaul how we think about economics, value, and even sustainability itself.
So let's just jump right in with a big question that the source material poses. Is our entire idea of sustainability maybe just a myth? The Nithirote Doctrine makes a pretty compelling case that it just might be.
Okay, so let's get into it. The doctrine points out what it sees as this massive, glaring flaw in modern economics. Our systems, they're incredible at measuring things, products, profits, all of it. But they completely miss one absolutely critical variable, the human factor. I'm talking about our intellectual capital, our potential, our well-being. It's like it doesn't even exist on the global balance sheet.
And at the very heart of the problem is this one assumption. See, current models, they treat sustainability as this absolute, this perfect, 100% achievable goal. But the doctrine brings up the Buddhist principle of anicca, which is basically impermanence. It argues that nothing in the entire universe is 100% static or permanent. So you have to ask, right? If we're starting from a premise that's fundamentally flawed, how can we ever expect to get the right answers?
Now this is where it gets really fascinating. You see how the doctrine totally re-engineers a concept we all know. On the left, you've got your traditional ESG, environment, social, and governance. And let's be honest, it's often criticized as just a sort of corporate checklist, right? But look at the right. The Nithirote Doctrine proposes ESGs. That extra little S stands for sustainable, and it fundamentally weaves the human factor into the very core of the model. It's a shift from a sterile checklist to a living, breathing ecosystem.
So what's the solution then? Well, it's this whole new way of thinking about and calculating value, which the author, Nithirote Swatharanan, lays out in the Nithirote Doctrine.
This one sentence, this is the central idea. It completely reframes our role on this planet. We're not just resource consumers who are draining everything, the doctrine argues, that we are the primary managers. And any system that ignores that simple fact, well, it's pretty much doomed to fail from the start. To actually make this work, the doctrine introduces a concept called multidimensional capital. And the idea is actually pretty simple, but it's also incredibly profound. Think about it. Why do we treat oil in the ground as this priceless asset, but we don't do the same for the collective knowledge, the creativity, and the potential of 8 billion people? This framework insists that our human capital isn't just some footnote, it's a primary asset, and it belongs on the global balance sheet.
But that brings up a huge question, doesn't it? I mean, how do you actually measure something as abstract as human potential or well-being? Well, the doctrine tackles this problem head-on with a really specific framework to try and quantify it. So instead of just relying on things like GDP, gross domestic product, this model brings in new metrics that are focused on people. It proposes a happiness index that you can actually measure, and something called human integrity, which looks at things like access to education, healthcare, and opportunity. The whole goal is to turn this abstract idea of well-being into hard data that you can plug right into our economic equations. Okay, now we're getting to the real mathematical core of this thing. The doctrine puts forward this high-precision calculation system. Now, the full algorithm is a protected trade secret, but the author does let us in on one absolutely crucial piece of the puzzle.
17.7%. According to the doctrine, this is not just some random number. It's a precisely calculated strategic coefficient. You can almost think of it as a universal risk factor, an admission that because of that whole impermanence thing, a perfect 100% sustainable world is impossible. It's like a buffer against reality. So, what exactly makes up this number?
And this chart just breaks it down perfectly. That 17.7% risk factor is a composite score. So you can see here, 8% of that risk comes from fixed inflation, 5% from currency volatility, and then, and this is the most important part, 4.7% is set aside for what the doctrine calls the opportunity loss of human time. This is a huge deal. It puts a real, quantifiable economic cost on wasted human potential.
All right, so we have this complex theory, but how do you actually apply it in the real world and make sure it's not just another system that people can game? Well, the answer, according to the doctrine, is all in the technology.
The whole framework is built on a blockchain. Now, for our purposes today, just think of it as a shared, permanent, and unchangeable digital record book. By using blockchain, the doctrine claims it can create a trustless environment. An environment where all the data, everything from carbon credits to these new happiness scores, can be audited with total transparency, mathematically, without needing some central bank or government to oversee it.
And here we go. This is a proof of concept. This dashboard, which is called Nithirote Sovereign, shows how these metrics could be tracked in real time. You can see the scores for environmental, social, and governance right there. And the quote at the bottom really drives it all home. This isn't just about accounting anymore. It's about taking on active management of all our global resources.
So if we pull all of this together, what's the ultimate recommendation? What does the doctrine want us to do? It's really calling for a fundamental reset of our entire global economic system, to create what you could call a human balance sheet.
So what's the game plan? Well, it boils down to 4 pretty radical shifts. First, we have to start treating time itself as a form of capital. Second, we need to begin measuring what actually matters by implementing a global household happiness index. Third, we have to stop this flawed chase for a 100% perfect system. And finally, maybe the most powerful step of all, we have to empower every single person by treating their potential, not as some soft skill, but as a hard, tangible asset.
And this is the ultimate claim. After testing the model, the author states that the data shows a direct, significant link between that happiness index and the stability of capital markets. In other words, the doctrine argues that happy, empowered people create a stable and prosperous economy. It's that simple.
You know, it's a huge idea, and it leaves us with this truly mind-bending question to chew on. What would our world actually look like if human happiness wasn't just some nice goal, but a hard asset bought and sold on the world's balance sheet? Definitely something to think about. Thanks so much for joining me today.